Hello and welcome to all the Hillians out there. I'm Joe here with my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
Today we're continuing Hyrule in Focus. You know, our Zelda series that's not about Tears of the Kingdom. Remember? Yeah, we forgot about it too. Alright, after Link arrives in that cathedral with Zelda, he's faced with the fierce dilemma of either modernity, doing nothing, or going off on the quest to save all of Hyrule. In all seriousness, Link in the manga is portrayed as a little indolent, relying on the help of the people of Kakariko. But when push comes to shove, he does rise to the occasion. Deep down, he is a hero at his core. We could get into all the various temples, or we could tackle them kind of one at a time or two at a time. I know most walkthroughs would go into all the side quests and whatnot, but this is not a gaming channel, so we're not going to touch on that. By the way, it's very easy to get about almost all the hearts in A Link to the Past, which is a little weird because it was later made a little more difficult and tricky in later Zelda games, which I actually have to side with those ones.
Why make something so easy when it should be a bit of a reward for hard work?
I'd argue Ocarina of Time and even Twilight Princess, and even to an extent Wind Waker, did this better. Link to the Past is just too easy. I played this game a while back and I beat it, and I found collecting the hearts, there's only maybe one of them I was missing. If one of the worst gamers in the world like me can do it, how easy was it for the 6-year-old master gamers when this game came out in around 91 or 92? I'm just being honest, 6-year-olds typically end up being really, really good gamers in comparison to us adults. First temple to really tackle, well, we'll say the one on the hill, because why not? We'll go from there. We're not going to get into all the tunnel stuff, although this is a repetition of a bit of the themes of rescuing Princess Zelda, that is to say, going down into the dark, into the pit which all heroes must descend into before the great escape from the darkness down below. This particular temple is that you're faced with a guy who does the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, or is it the multiplication technique or whatever? That stupid Naruto joke. Dragon Ball Z did it first, with Piccolo and Krillin multiplying into multiple goons. Technically, Tien Shin Han was able to do it first before that.
Yes.
In Dragon Ball. So this guy's imitating Tien Shin Han, which, shame on him. That this boss, honestly, isn't terribly hard. It's just, yeah, if you line him up properly, you can just take pot shots at him. He gets a little trickier once he gets all steamed, but even then, he's not terribly hard. The idea here, I'd argue, is you can see that Nintendo is flirting with the idea of fighting multiple opponents at once. And the reason is that later in Ocarina of Time, they kind of perfect the technique of having Link fight multiple foes all at the same time. But the difference in A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time is that arguably it's a little harder in A Link to the Past. In Ocarina of Time, the enemies will attack you one at a time, whereas A Link to the Past, they'll all just charge. In that regard, they had not yet perfected this kind of gameplay mechanic, but I think it's better in the earlier game in this case, because it's a little harder there. And I'm only arguing in favor of difficulty because it's more realistic that they'd all throw themselves at him.
And the fact that this boss isn't too difficult, you could tell this is pretty much the first dungeon of the game. They're not wanting to throw the extreme bosses that would wipe you out in one hit
at you, yeah. Well, this guy could wipe you out, but if you're not careful, but, you know. The gameplay where you're seeing is from a long play, because I don't know how to transfer my data from 3DS to computer. It's one of those technical secrets that escape me still to this day. But that said, I'm going to be honest, I didn't do half as well as the guy who this gameplay is taken from, which you can find the link down below. He's a really good gamer. Gets the Pendant of Courage at the end of this temple, which shows that he had to go down into the dark, fight multiple guys charging at him with swords, who are pretty skilled. I think thematically the idea is to once again enter a claustrophobic space and fight a kind of almost Nazgul type foe. Basically overcome the dark, swim against the tide, because 6 against 1, I guess you could say in a metaphorical manner, Link is fighting against an entire crowd, which it's him fighting to establish his individuality and that he is apart from the crowd. He is apart from the herd. He's, rather than being a sheep, a wolf. This is proven by the fact that he probably likes mutton in the comic. No joke. In all seriousness, Link is establishing courage and individuality. And I honestly wish we had a bit more lore and story fleshed out for some of these minor temples. in A Link to the Past. But a lot of that wouldn't come up till Ocarina of Time, when they would do a lot more to set up the story, hammer things into shape, so to speak. The next boss we're going to depict is the Sandworm, which I think it's taken from Conan, this sort of creature. Honestly, it feels like something kind of Howardian as a foe. And I know it's a popular theme in a lot of fantasy universes these days. Idea is essentially fighting against a force of nature, really. The incarnation of the desert. Man has never been able to defeat the desert, and man never will. You look at ancient history with Akhenaten trying to build a city in a desert, which that's a pretty ongoing theme of a lot of tyrants. Oh, I could build in the desert. I could bring water there. I am divine. I can conquer nature. And then what ends up winning every time?
Nature.
It's the folly of man.
There's a reason why many cultures say you have to respect and fear nature.
In this case, Link, I think, has to learn respect, but at the same time, there's a Heraclean element here of his labors. He has to conquer nature, or part of it, in a way, in order to establish his mastery over it. For example, Heracles had to conquer the Chimera, or the Hydra, in order to establish his mastery over them. And that's the whole idea behind such contests against monsters that are supposedly spawned from nature, or the gods or demons. And that's really what Link is doing. He's establishing his mastery over the desert. On the other hand, he's not building a city there, so he's not going insane. This is simply the idea of conquering the wild side of his masculinity, proving that he can hunt. He is an animal. He's conquering the animal within. Receiving a pendant of power, that just further adds to it. The idea of the pendant of power is clearly there to establish that Link is good, but not safe. He's courageous by this time, but he's also powerful. He's strong. Like I said, this harkens back to ancient mythology. Every civilization has this sort of story. And that aside, there is one thing that's pretty interesting. By having 3 gems like that, 3 pendants, this is a nod to Tolkien's 3 rings of elvish power, I think. In that you had one which went to Gil-galad, and then later Gil-galad passed it down to Elrond. One went to Galadriel, which she kept. The last went to Círdan, and Círdan later passed it down to Gandalf's was the Ring of Fire. Elrond's was the Ring of Water, and Galadriel got the last one. One thing in this timeline / game that's notable is that the Zora have been mutated into monsters and are pretty hideous to look upon, typically attacking Link, which shows that they have kind of fallen, which is a shame because they're pretty noble people in Ocarina of Time and most other depictions. This shows the evolution of the storytelling universe of Hyrule in that the studio changed their minds on what to do with the Zora. That aside, I get the sense that one reason they don't want to come back to the Fallen timeline is that they find it too constraining to portray the Zora as villains. On the other hand, we have not seen the Gorons or the Gerudos. Why not show them? And heck, you could give the Zora of the Fallen timeline maybe a redemption arc and have them cleanse themselves of the corruption of Ganon. But it seems like these are ideas that Nintendo's not interested in. Instead, they're more interested in the science fiction of Tears of the Kingdom and whatnot. I'll be honest, I really like the Fallen timeline. I wish that they'd make a game of the evident visual quality of Breath of the Wild for each of the 3 timelines. That would allow us to explore more of Hyrule. I understand there's a lot of sci-fi nuts out there, but the draw for me to Zelda was always medieval fantasy, not science fiction. I guess since Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were very popular, science fiction right now is more popular. So people don't want a fantasy Zelda.
And that's unfortunate because I like fantasy. I wish Zelda would stay with fantasy.
The trouble is that I think they view it as less profitable than science fiction. And in this regard, fantasy these days is not as profitable as other genres. So more and more pillars and mainstay stories and whatnot are moving away from the fantasy genre. The Witcher was taken into the direction of multiverse stuff. That itself is a sci-fi concept. Zelda's moved towards science fiction. And you have House of the Dragon. Well, that's more horror and slasher fiction. At least it's sticking with mostly with some fantasy stuff. So there's still a few pillars, but I expect they'll disappear soon enough. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were Link taking down Ganon.